Hello everybody and welcome back to the vlog. My name is Will Ellington and I'm coming to you from Osaka in Japan. This is the second video in my series that I'm developing on building a niche specific side hustle, a niche business using, in this case, print on demand services. Now I've been working on this for a couple of weeks. I set up a shop on redbubble.com. I'm selling primarily t-shirts, although Redbubble allows you to sell many other types of goods too. I've created an Instagram account connected to that where I promote the goods I create. My Instagram posts consist of mostly images of my products plus quote-based Instagram posts. For example, here's one, here's another quote, another one from Waiting for Godot, and so on and so on. What I noticed over the last 2 weeks is, in amongst all the different types of things I post, it's always the straight quotes that do the best. For example, this one here, text on a dark background. Another one, for example, is this one, text on a dark background. And then text on image-based backgrounds, but the images are rather subdued, so the text pops out. And so I want to talk in this video about finding interesting quotes. It's not so simple. So let's talk a little bit about that, okay? Also, before I start talking about that, let me just say that in 2 weeks I've made 6 sales on Redbubble. And it's interesting that those 6 sales, all from the same person, were all for a text-based item, and the design is the one I just showed you here by Brecht. It says, "In dark times, is there also singing?" Yes, there is singing about the dark times. A quote from Brecht, the German playwright / director from the 1920s and 30s. Now, that quote is interesting to me because, okay, he was writing at about the 1930s interwar period and mounting tensions in Europe, but the sentiment of that quote now applies and takes on a new resonance today in the context of, well, things like climate change, global warming, but also the pandemic, and so on and so on. So it's interesting how this quote works in that sense. Okay. So how to find an interesting quote. Now you can go to Google and search for find a quote, and you will get a long list of different websites you can use, and go ahead and explore that. I'm going to keep this simple. I'm going to limit this to one site, and that is wikiquote.org. So why only showcase Wikiquote? Because 3 reasons. One, it's very nicely organized and categorized. That makes it a gem for niche specific quotes. 2, the sources of the quotes are usually included. So that means you can do a bit of background research about the quote. You don't want to misquote a quote in your goods. You want to know where it comes from, what it's about, what it relates to. And 3, well, it's just an easy website to use. Okay. So if you go to wikiquote.org, on the side you can see the basic categories: people, literary works, proverbs, films, TV shows, themes, categories. If you click on any one of those, let's go for people, for example, you'll see that it's organized from A to Z. So if you click on the A list, you get a list of people's names in alphabetical order, and there are a lot of names, and for each name there are some quotes associated with that. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you an example of how I would go about finding a quote for my niche, which is theatre. Now, I mentioned earlier Bertolt Brecht, who appeared in one of the quotes. Here it is here. So, for example, if you know the name of a person related to the field, or the name of a product or an object, you can go ahead and search Wikiquote for that. So I'm going to just put in Brecht and see what comes up. And here he is, the playwright. And you can see a list of quotes by him. And people remain what they are even if their faces fall apart. But something's missing. and so on and so on. A long list of quotes with the sources, which play, which book, which interview, or whatever did they come from. And sometimes even there are links to those. And you can see in this case there's a long list of quotes to go through and choose. And I could use some of these for t-shirt designs. Let's search for another famous dramatist, Shakespeare. And here we have, as you can imagine, an even longer list. A lot of these quotes are from the plays themselves by Shakespeare. And this is just a very nice, quick way to start actually finding some content for your t-shirts. Now, in this case, the quotes are organized by plays. And then there are quotes about Shakespeare as well. And one way of drilling down into this content is that if you have a specific keyword you're targeting for a quote, a particular theme or topic, then on this page, for example, you could just go ahead and open a search box I'm using Mac, Command F, and then you can type your word here. So for example, music. And then you can find, for example, Twelfth Night, if music be the food of love, play on, a very famous quote from Act 1, Scene 1 of that play. And that's a nice quote for a t-shirt. And in fact, I made one based on that. Here it is, if music be the food of love, play on. So that's one way of using Wikiquote. Okay, I want to end this video by talking finally about how to go about choosing an interesting quote. So once you've gone to a site like Wikiquote and found, and you've got all these possibilities, how do you actually choose a quote, right? So I broke this down. I wrote a post about it on my Redbubble journal, and I'll put a link to the journal in the description of the vlog. But I broke it down into 2 steps. Where to find interesting quotes. One source is Wikiquote, we've just seen that. But how to choose an interesting quote? So let's think about this. The question of how to choose a quote, it's kind of let's reverse engineer the process. Why would you buy a quote t-shirt in the first place? Perhaps there are 2 reasons: to share part of your identity, or to provoke a reaction. So that has 2 categories in a way: serious, inspirational quotes, comedy, satire, kind of political quotes, reaction quotes. So in both cases, I take a kind of short, sharp, shock approach. What do I mean by that? I mean, the length of the quote. Long quotes don't work. It's got to be short and snappy. In a second, the person viewing the quote on something like Instagram has to grasp the quote in a blink of an eye, in a second. So the quote has to be relatively short. Sharp, the message needs to have an impact, like a punchline of a joke. The message connects to something happening in the moment, or something really at the core of your niche. Not something that's been done to death, something that's fresh. And then shock or surprise. The message should shock or challenge your audience, make them think. And all these ingredients, short, sharp, shock, kind of work together to help shape that choice of the quote. And I put here an example of short, sharp, shock. If you remember, in the 90s, Benetton, the Italian fashion brand, made a series of posters that used shock ads. They're called shock ads, campaigns that had a very political kind of orientation. And the images were very, very powerful, because they communicate a story in the blink of an eye. It's quite shocking imagery as well. And so taking that principle of the shock ad, how can you apply that to a quote? Well, again, it goes back to finding a quote that really stimulates ideas and so on. So I think you've got to be very selective with quotes. You can't just take anything. It's got to connect to your niche. It's got to connect to the zeitgeist, what's happening now. It's got to be short. It's got to have a clear message. And then after you've found the quote, the next stage is putting it together into a visual design. And I'll make a separate video about how I design my quote-based t-shirts. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Just wanted to showcase Wikiquote's talk a little bit about some of the ways of thinking I apply to finding quotes. And I hope this has been interesting and useful. Let me know in the comments below, how do you go about finding quotes? What are your criteria? And I'd love to learn. This is a learning process for me. So yeah, hit that subscribe button if you want to keep watching these videos, and I'll keep making them. And I'll catch you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.